Good evening. The planning board meeting on Tuesday, November 21st will come to order. We have a light agenda tonight. To continue public hearing for 122 Foster Street is continued till our December 5th meeting, and we really only have two discussion topics, most significantly the framework for the recreational commercial marijuana zoning bylaw. What I thought that I'd like to focus on tonight, and is to do a page turn of the agreement, because we've not done that yet, and to focus more on how the pieces fit together, what the definitions mean, and so forth, more so than dealing with specific substantive issues. They may come up, we could address them, but what I don't want to do is spend an hour talking about which are the uses we want to allow. We can park them, I think, but as I went through this, I think there were so many things where we need to tie the pieces together, make sure our definitions are tight, make sure we've got everything, that it's actually worth doing that. So I don't know if anybody has any other thoughts in mind from their perspective, but
That makes sense to me. I wanted to ask a question, if I could, at some point about, there was in our packet the two warrant articles, and I just have a procedural question of what actually happened.
Yeah,
I don't know what happened.
Let's do that separate, because I don't want to get sidetracked. We could, before the end of the night, we can do that. Are we able to put the text of the thing up on the screen? It might be a little bit easier, given I know Jeannie's not here, and
Sure, we could try.
yeah.
Yeah,
Sure. Which one is this? Is this the red line one or the plain one?
Yeah, we ought to probably work off of the red lines a little bit easier. At least I find it easier.
Second document.
yeah. For people looking at home, it might be easier to look on the plane. The red line might be.
The thing, I just like the red line better, because then I know what changed.
They did with that.
Fair enough.
Yeah,
For us, that's helpful.
yeah.
Will we have the time to speak too?
Yes, we are. Our primary focus for tonight, frankly, is to talk about the bylaw and take a march through the bylaw. If I may, if you have short comments, we could address them in the beginning, but if it's a substantive, lengthy discussion, I'd rather have this first. But we're going to be at it for at least an hour, hour and a half.
Why don't you go through it all, and then we'll have some comments.
Okay.
On things
Can you stand up so for the,
I almost have it for you.
yeah.
On items that are typographical, we did pick up a few things to help clarify the definitions, things like that. As you're doing the page turns, if we see any of those, would you like us to point those out along the way?
I think if you have those sorts of things that are clear errors and omissions, yes, but if there's areas where you disagree, I think, I don't mind having a disagreement, but I don't want to do it as a back and forth negotiation.
Agreed. I just
Yeah.
felt like rather than turning the pages once, then having a discussion with us and then turning the pages a second
No, that's
time.
fine. If
Okay.
there's things that are drafting changes, that's fine.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah.
So are we doing 171114 8.14 marijuana overlay district red lines?
Yeah.
Just want to make sure we're all on the,
Yeah.
looking at the same thing.
Yeah.
The second one, second document. The second
Yeah.
document in there.
Yes.
Oh, it's a beautiful thing, so, okay.
Probably make it a little bit. Okay.
So, let's make it open-ended. As soon as you see something on the page that we're on, which is we're on the first page, obviously, now, raise it up as a question, and, we can talk about it or resolve it or whatever.
This is the most recent. This is the most recent?
Yes, this is the most recent version with the red line.
Okay.
Okay, that's in your packets.
Yeah.
I think it's easiest to go through the red line, right?
that's fine.
Okay,
Yeah.
all right.
So I actually, in your preamble thing, just a procedural question, is if we go with this, would the article for town meeting eliminate the existing bylaw completely, or does this layer on top of that?
The way this is drafted, it layers on top.
Okay.
It's organized to layer on top of it because there's a provision in this section that denotes where the MOD is located. And in that section, you can put in the section where the existing MMOD is and also where the proposed area
Okay,
is.
so as we go through, maybe you could just point
Yep,
to
I will do
those
that,
connection
absolutely, yep.
points. Okay.
And so just as a question, I think I know the answer, but I think it'd be helpful. If this is an overlay district and someone chooses to take advantage of the overlay and get a special permit under this, can they, for other things on that parcel, use the other zoning, or are they limited to using what's in the overlay district?
So in that section 814.1, there's a provision in there that has italics language, and that's where there's a choice to be made as to whether or not it's going to be an either. You have a use of the parcel under the MOD, or do the MOD and the underlying district. So that's a determination to be made.
So I guess on that, I guess that's it. I mean, is that a discussion point we should have now while we're there? So this is the italics and 8.14.1 fourth
Yeah, I
line.
see that. Yeah, I actually had a question for that. How elaborate would you expect that to be? Is that a sentence or two, or is that like a whole paragraph where we would lay that out?
That's a sentence or two, because in the MMOD as it exists now, there's particular language in there that you have to choose, I believe. And so it's just one sentence, so I can call that up for you. And so this is almost a substantive issue, because the sheet that Jean provided with you with the different uses of the underlying district, the 40R district, and this particular, and the medical marijuana, it puts the different uses in there, and then you have to sort of go through it and say, is this a compatible use or not, and whether you or not you want those uses in the same district, to be allowed in the same district. So it may appear to be a procedural, but in all likelihood, it's substantive.
Well, I think it is substantive, but I want to, are there, when you get down to it, are there three permutations here that you could either toggle between the two, you could choose the overlay, or you could choose the underlying? And is that a choice of the applicant, or is that something we have to decide?
I would suggest that you should decide that in your zoning bylaw,
Okay.
as to whether or not you want it to be a choice. And that's, whether it's going to be a choice or whether or not it's not going to be a choice, like whether you can go back and forth between the two.
Either we can say that if you take advantage of the overlay district and get a special permit through the overlay district, then you're prohibited from using the underlying industrial, zoning.
Okay.
Or we can say you can use both. You can get a permit if you want under the marijuana district, and if you have another parcel in the same, or it's on the same parcel of another building, another permit that you want to seek, you could do it in the underlying zoning.
Right, okay.
To
Yeah,
me,
it's really two, it's not the third, because you wouldn't even apply for a permit under this if you were just going to go with the underlying zoning.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct. Right.
Yeah.
So, and to me, at least based on what we've seen so far into where this is going to be, it would make sense to me to be able to choose either. I mean, I think if you have a business that requires a marijuana special permit, fine. If you still want to, if you get that and then you want to do something that doesn't require a state permit, and we've talked about all the different kind of permutations of what might or what might not, it would seem to make sense that you could do either of the already zoned there.
Well, you're also going to have the problem during the transition period anyway, right?
Right.
Yeah.
And I think that's consistent with how it was done in the medical marijuana overlay district. It was either or. So I think that's a consistency thing as well. That's how we've done it before.
So I can read, you want me to, I have that section up. So in the medical marijuana district, it's 812.1, and it states you may be used either for an RMD essentially, or a use in the underlying district. So it doesn't allow for that going back and forth. You get to choose. Which do you want to do? It's not an and/or.
So that's different then?
Yep.
Yeah, okay. Any sort of initial opinions on this side?
I like what Aiden has to say. I mean, it seems if it's consistent with the other, the MMOD, then that makes sense to keep it consistent.
It's not.
It's not. Oh, she just said. Oh, you said it's not.
Consistent. I think the question is, if we're putting an overlay, and we're saying, do we want to? And there are reasons to make someone choose. I mean, it kind of locks you in, so you're not kind of flip flopping or waffling about what you're going to do. But at the same time, to me, especially where we've heard in this district of the plans from the innovation group, some are marijuana, which will definitely require licenses. Some, to me, seem like they won't. And frankly, if they aren't going to require a special permit and could do it under the existing zoning, I'd rather it not come here and just exist as it currently does now. To me, if it's something you could do right now on that site particularly, we shouldn't stop that. And there might be some grandfathering. And I'd say and/or. Yeah. That would
So you
be-
must choose one and go with that.
No, I think you could, no, I think if you choose to get a special, if you choose to use the overlay district and later on you want to use the current zoning,
You just can without coming before a board again or having a request for anything special.
you would have to go through whatever is required current under the zoning that, for what you're seeking. So if it currently requires a special permit, then you have to do that. If you,
I just wonder if it's too confusing. Maybe that's just the nature of.
Well, it is, I mean, there are multi-order effects. I kind of think, let's maybe get everybody's view and then decide how to handle it. Pete?
Just trying to sort through why we would change the approach that we had, which I think was either or, and what the rationale would be now to change it to, and or.
I mean, I think part of the logic is when we did the original thing, the maximum scale was 20,000 square feet. And we're talking about a larger scale now, so there's more permutations of things that could happen. I mean, I think that's probably the argument.
Like went out of business, if you had a big huge site and they went out of business and then you could have something else go in there and not
Well,
worry
that
about
would
the.
be, although you could just rescind the permit and go back to the underlying zoning anyway, if that were the case, yeah. But I don't necessarily want to resolve it here. I just want to give everybody a chance to express their view, and then we can decide how to go. Aaron, what do you think?
I'm still wrapping my head around this, but so what would be I guess the and/or condition? I guess maybe specifically for Osgood Landing, would it be that an applicant would come forward, maybe they would apply for a special permit with the marijuana overlay district, and then maybe at a later time use a part of that property as the underlying original use? That's the way I should be understanding this, and
That would be the either, you could do either, yeah.
Can I just jump in and just say, and so what you would do in that instance is you would, if you look at the yellow sheet that Jean provided earlier, like it might be helpful before you sort of make a final decision on that, is just to go through those different uses and determine if there are inconsistent uses between the underlying and the overlay district.
I mean, I think we ought to go back and look at that. Could you also, if it isn't too much of a problem, actually draft the language both ways? So we would have, if we went this way, this is what it would look like if we went that way.
You mean the document that says permitted uses? The one with the columns?
Yes,
Yeah.
that one's.
So can I ask a question about this?
Yep.
So some of these that are shaded in yellow, right, strike me as really inconsistent with a marijuana district, like a nonprofit school or 2-3 family townhomes, things like that you probably wouldn't want to see, and that are the draft sort of deals with. You can't put this near an existing school or near an existing playground. But is there something, the way that the zoning bylaw operates now, does it sort of prohibit these from coming in later? Like, so if let's say this goes through and a marijuana establishment goes into Osgood and then someone later says, hey, this is a great spot to put a daycare center, because we've got all of these great people working here now, and they have kids, and we want to have a daycare facility. Is there something else in the zoning bylaw that would sort of prohibit them from locating that so close to a marijuana facility, or is that something that we need to deal with now?
That's what you need to do.
Okay.
That's part of what you're doing, is you're drafting those regulations.
So there's nothing around sort of the location of schools or playgrounds or anything that would prohibit it from being placed to close to an existing.
So in terms of the zoning bylaw, no, because what you're doing is you're creating a new overlay district. And so within that context, you would be setting up those requirements. But in terms of whether there's something under the state law that would deal with that issue, that's something other than that. But so what we're dealing with right now in terms of the zoning bylaw, since this district has not been created yet, and the uses haven't been laid out of what is permitted and what is not permitted, that's sort of what we're running through right now to do. And one of the things to keep in mind on that yellow sheet is, I think it also shows what's allowed under the 40R, that smart growth provision. And so what's suggested in here, and I believe what has been suggested throughout, is that 40R will go away if this goes into effect. So if you just, maybe it'd be helpful to draw a line through that. Then you can just look at the other uses allowed in that sheet.
Yeah, so you can update this and show us what will go away. if
Yes.
that- We sunset that? Okay,
Yep.
great. Because I have a hard time looking at this, knowing what
Okay,
stays and what
right,
goes.
yep,
So-
absolutely.
Because there's some of this that I would be very concerned about staying, like being allowed in the
Right,
same place.
right.
But if it just is going to be sunsetted, then that creates. a
Well,
different-
yeah,
Okay.
no, I think that's, and that's the reason why I think when we come back again, we can go through and decide what are the implications of each option for that very reason, so, yeah. Okay. Moving through this page, any other comments on the first page? I did want to ask, in the new language you added, which it says in 1814-2, and such uses which are ancillary to commercial and medical but not licensed by the, can you give an example of what would be in there, or is that just sort of suggested good, strong language?
That's just sort of all-encompassing language. So there may be some uses such as maybe marijuana paraphernalia. So that type of, to use marijuana or packaging materials or something that it's going to be like, it's feeding off of the new industry that's there. And so what the purpose of the overlay district is to deal with all of those in an overall encompassing land use matter. And so when you have, maybe you'll have a retail store that sells paper goods or something like that.
Yeah, because I think my only concern here is, I think it's the language is in there to be create a little bit of flexibility in the way we've set this up, but I don't want to inadvertently allow a use that maybe we don't want to see. Especially if we go down the path of, not allowing recreational.
I can cross
So,
that out.
Absolutely. I'm not saying we necessarily need to strike it, but I was just trying to get at substantively, why what the intent was and what it would cover.
Yeah, and it's just to make it as broad, for the zoning bylaw to be as broad as possible, to sort of give the planning board that authority over citing uses in this area, and also being able to regulate uses in the area.
One of the things we don't know is, are there going to be businesses or industries that are able to be involved in the marijuana business but not need a license from the state? So someone who transports from a cultivator to a manufacturer, if that's part of the manufacturer or if that's part of the cultivator, then yeah, it's under their license. But maybe a separate industry springs up that it specifically transports marijuana. I don't know if they'd be required to have a license, if they're just transporting, but it may be something that we'd want to regulate. I think that's kind of what I saw in that. I think it's to catch things that we haven't thought of or that the industry hasn't thought of yet.
Well, that might be actually a good general topic, and I hesitate to ask the representatives of Osgood to, jump in, but could you give us a little bit of just general clarity on that point?
Sure. I think that would be a perfect example, is if a transportation company wanted to use the property to set up a transportation company or a security company, that might be an ancillary tenant that we would like to have at the property. I think they would fit in good there, and would also give good credence to using the facility for like testing, training. We have the driving courses out back, so that would probably be a perfect example of somebody who right now is not required to be licensed by the state, by the CCC, but who we would absolutely want to have as a tenant at the property.
Okay, good, thank you.
Mr. Chairman, could people who aren't on the board say who they are and what their affiliation
Oh,
is?
sure.
Michael Rosener, I'm an attorney for the Mass Innovation Works.
So, that marijuana transportation might be an example of an industry, but how would this work with, say, the growth of a marijuana paraphernalia industry in the town? Would that be something that would, be located there, or?
Well, that's a little bit what I'm trying to get at. There's certain things that I think we would all believe would be very benign, but there's other ones we might feel far less comfortable about.
So generally, marijuana paraphernalia is not regulated at all, and in fact, most marijuana paraphernalia is, at least now, classified just as tobacco paraphernalia. It can be used for either, but it's not regulated because it can be used for tobacco as well as for marijuana. So I'm not sure. I don't think it really fits in with the innovation, and I'm not sure it is part of this, but there's not much regulation of that as it is right now.
And that was my example, and that was just an example. So if there are other, if that's not an appropriate example for what's an ancillary to this zoning district, then we can just forget about that, and you can deal with something, whether or not you want to have that use in the district at another point in this bylaw. But if what you're thinking about now is the ancillary, such as transportation or security, then you can just put that into this bucket, and we can deal with those types of uses later on in this bylaw.
I think the type of use of the ancillary will depend on what type of licenses are allowed. So if in the MOD retail isn't allowed, then paraphernalia really isn't an ancillary use to the other types of it has nothing to do with growing. But if retail is allowed, then actually I could see that connection. So I think it depends on what uses are allowed in
to
that
some
district.
degree, I think the thing is, what triggers a special permit requirement as opposed to what doesn't? And there's certain things that wouldn't, but other things that would, and that's, maybe as we go through, that's what we ought to focus on, so. Okay, anything else anybody has on the first page? Okay.
This is really nitpicky, but in 1814-2, it says sort of towards the bottom within the site, and that just feels really specific. I don't know if it's supposed to be within the overlay district, the MOD, or within a site, but I don't think we're talking about just one particular site.
That's true. Yep. So I can say within the district?
Yeah, I think, or within the MOD or something like that, yeah. I would just change it that way.
Okay, that does make sense. I will do that.
So is 18.4.3, the boundaries, is that just to be determined, like we'll figure out where the boundaries are?
Yeah.
It's just a placeholder, okay.
Yeah. So, okay.
So the only thing that's new in 8.14.3 is breaking it into a sub-district A and B.
And what is the?
And the purpose of that is, so right now, as it stands with medical marijuana, it's the vertical license, so you have that right to dispense. And so there has to be a portion of your zoning district that allows that dispensary. But if we want to say that we're only going to allow a dispensary in one particular spot of an MOD, breaking them into a sub-district A and B says in sub-district B, there is no dispensary. In sub-district A, we're going to let that go over here. But for the majority of this zoning district, will not be a dispensary. So that's the suggestion, if that's what you're looking for, because I've heard sort of feedback on that issue.
I actually looked at,
Approach, but B is the Osgood property, A is the old
Yes.
overlay, yeah. Okay.
Okay.
So moving into page 2, the definitions. Can you just tell us a little bit about how, like, you derived the definitions? Did you just copy and paste what were the state law, or
Yes.
was there, you know?
That was my intent, to have the definitions from the state law in the zoning bylaw. And if there's any, and I will check that, I'll go back to the state law to make sure that I've done that, track the language specifically, because I want to make sure that I did, and I haven't done that recently. But when we get to finalize this, I'll definitely go back and word for word it with the state law.
Is the state law, it feels to me that there's a certain overlap and redundancy of some of the definitions.
I would agree with
I don't know, maybe that's just intent, you always do that, but it just occurred to me. I mean, is that a problem at all?
In terms of what type of use you're allowing?
Yeah, I mean, like, the, well, the medical marijuana treatment center and the limited one, I guess, yeah, there is a distinction because you're allowed to do one thing on one and not in the other, but
And that's not the state law, that's the one that's what I sort of parsed out to be able to give us the sub-district A and B. So the only
Right,
difference,
right, okay,
so
is-
that's
yeah,
different, that's
right,
not the
yeah,
state law.
that's-
But I
yeah.
think you're right, that in a lot of instances of those definitions, there's a lot of overlapping uses.
Like cultivator and product manufacturer, pretty common, there's some overlap there. I mean, I don't have a problem with it, I don't know if anybody thinks that might be an issue or, create any kind of confusion.
I think this is by far the best way to go, is to track the
Yeah.
state law. Because if these are the licenses that are going to be issued, then I think they're best definitions to use.
Mr. Chairman, we did have one comment on the definition.
Okay, go ahead.
On the limited medical marijuana, and understanding the point is that in sub-district B, you won't have retail sales. If it would be possible at the end of that definition to not be allowed to sell, distribute, dispense, or administer to the public. And the reason I would add the words "to the public" is a medical marijuana cultivator can still sell off 30% of their production to another RMD elsewhere in the state. So if they weren't allowed to sell or distribute, they wouldn't be allowed to sell off 30% of their production. And the other thing we would want to do, to the extent the regs eventually allow it, when there's more regulation developed on research and development, we would like to be able to sell product, possibly even give product to those people on the property doing research and development. So if the point was to prohibit retail sale, I think we could do that by just adding the words "to the public" at the end. Thank you.
Suzanne, to John's earlier question about the process for the definitions, I didn't quite follow. In number 2 and 3, the red line portion, did you mean you're taking the red line portion from state guidelines, or how else did you get the red line?
The red line portion is from the state law, and in the limited medical marijuana treatment center, it doesn't have the entire definition of a medical marijuana treatment center. So I deleted the language that states starting, let's see where it starts at, administering marijuana. So if you go to number 2, and it's the 5th line down, and after the word marijuana, it states, for the benefit of registered qualifying patients in the treatment of debilitating medical conditions. That is not included in the limited medical marijuana treatment, and also the the word, let me just assure, transfer, transportation, sale, and distribution. So some of those words in there that allow for the use of dispensing it to the public or selling it to the public, I just deleted those when I came and put the definition of the limited medical marijuana.
Yeah, I mean, I think as we go through, tighten up the edits, we can
Yeah.
tighten up. But I understand now that was a distinction.
Right.
Yeah, that you created, yeah.
So if we were to consider the point just made, could we put back in that language for the benefit of registered qualifying patients in the treatment of debilitating medical conditions, just for consistency, so, but not selling, distributing, dispensing, or administering marijuana to registered qualified patients?
Yeah.
Just the public could be a lot of different things. So we could,
Yeah.
if we wanted to go that route, we could use that same language to make the same point, that you can, and if in A, you can sell to registered qualified patients, and B, you can't.
Yeah, mirroring the language
Right.
with the, yeah, is a cleaner way to do it, yeah. Anything more on page 2? Okay, moving into page 3.
So on page 3, at section 9, the definition of marijuana research and development is not derived from the state law, but it's, so I drafted that and threw that in there just so that we would have so you would have some idea of whether or not you wanted to have that as a particular use for this district, because that's sort of what the property owner has, represented, that's the purpose, part of the purpose of what they want to do with that site. And that's just from essentially looking at the industry and seeing what other companies have done, what their definition they have come up to do for that use. So.
Will this run us into any problems down the road if there's no corresponding definition in the state law in terms of the licensing requirements that we're going to ask any applicant to meet?
So whether or not they have a license to do.
Right, because if we're saying that anybody who wants to put in a marijuana business under this zoning bylaw has to have a license from the state, and they come and say, look, we want to do a marijuana research and development as you define it, but then they don't, if that doesn't key into one of the licenses that the state's granting, does that put us in a weird position of trying to evaluate how do we know that you've got the right license? How do you, or?
So that conflict could come up. I mean, I think that's a really good point. The only thing that you would think is, one of the things that this is put into the bylaw for is to some way have a special permitting process, having the planning board be able to review and put the conditions and the criteria on the type of use that will do the research and development in using marijuana. So we can switch it. There's room to move this and change the definition, but it's something to consider whether the planning board, you want to have that special permitting ability over research and development versus the underlying district just says research and development is allowed.
Right, no,
So do we want to call it out?
I think
Yeah.
we do want to call it out. I just want to make sure that later on where it talks about the licensing requirements,
Yeah.
that it doesn't say specifically, like, that it just doesn't tie us in so that,
Right.
yeah.
But I mean, if you take an example, one is, pure R&D, so you need samples products, so you need the raw good. That would, I would presume under the state law, require a license, because you're having something that otherwise you're not supposed to have. I think the more interesting one is something, maybe a step removed, maybe like lighting. Now, maybe a lighting company needs samples too to figure out how it grows, so it might be moved. But I think ultimately, what you're getting at is what triggers the need for a permit. Is it the license, or is the use, or is it, what is that creates a trigger?
So yeah, we're not there yet, but I definitely agree with Jen on that.
Yeah.
One of the things that we can do here is I can come back with a phrase or, some sort of language that addresses the fact that they will have to have a license and whether the type of, because to a certain extent for land use permitting and a special permit conditions and requirements, if they're saying to you in their application, we're going to do marijuana research and development, as long as they have a license from the state to do what they want to do with marijuana, then it doesn't necessarily have that great of an impact on the type of special permit you give them, as long as they have that license. And so as you can evaluate under the license application that they've put towards the state.
But I think the point being, but I think, I think we should probably just come back to it, because I think the definition, I really actually like the definition. I think it's great to have it in the definition section. I think when we get to what triggers special permits, we need to be careful to make sure that it's not only just a license that triggers it, that if there's a business that uses marijuana, whether it's ancillary or whether it's their primary focus and it's not necessarily ancillary to a particular license, that they are triggered to go through the special permit rather than just being research and development.
Okay.
So I think we can come back to that later on when we get there, but I think the definition should stay really for that reason, and we can add to it if there are things about the definition, but.
If I might, you hit on 3 points that we actually were going to make, and we agree 100% with the points that you just hit on. And just to kind of point those out, within research and development, you might actually have research and development that isn't cannabis related. It might be lighting related. So we wanted to add words that allowed research and development that could be applied to other industries within the definition. And then you have research and development for institutions of higher learning. We take it, you meant like universities and medical schools, but we also thought that you might have medical research done by companies, private companies, rather than institutions. So we looked at that change there. So that picked up, Mr. Chairman, your comment about lighting. We picked up the comment about whether or not you would need a permit or not. And if you look at the section on special permits, I believe it's in section 3, it's 8.14.8, subsection 3C, we felt as though a simple add at the beginning of that section, to the extent a special permit is seeking approval for a permitted use which requires a license from the Commonwealth, either the Department of Public Health or the Cannabis Control Commission, then you would require, as a condition of moving forward, evidence of that license. So that answered Board Member Luz's concern. And then I think it all ties back to the definition of AMU, because I believe in the definition of AMU, which is used consistently throughout the bylaw, there are a couple of places where almost every place it would apply to uses that require state licenses, but one of the things in the definition of AMU is research and development, and right now research and development does not require a state license from either the DPH or the CCC. So I think in those 3 points, and those are 3 of our markups, and they're exactly on the 3 points you identified, and we had the exact same thoughts and comments. Thank you.
When you
Yep.
said apply to other industries,
Yes.
why would you need a marijuana license then?
In this facility,
Yeah.
if we can only do marijuana and marijuana research and
So
development.
that, right, but if we went the alternate route to make it an overlay and you could choose either, then we wouldn't need that.
Potentially. I think the theory was if I'm a lighting company, I might take all of the research I get from cannabis, and maybe I'm going to have a row of cannabis growing here and a row of basil growing here, and I'm going to work with the lighting to see how the lighting, water techniques,
Right. Okay.
Okay.
So they might not focus
primarily on cannabis. Right.
Okay.
Suzanne, I have what's probably a very small question here, but if you look at under 9, I'm thinking of instances where the board was really struggling in an issue over the ambiguity of a definition. And, we had, an instance where the definition in the bylaw of structure became quite a point of debate. And again, I may just be off track here, and tell me, and we'll move on, but at the very beginning of 9, uses primarily focused. I don't know, I'm just imagining we could really go around the bend on, well, that's not primarily.
Yes, I understand.
And I'm just wondering if that kind of almost undercuts the whole paragraph. It's kind of a trap door.
That's a good point.
I think you're right. I think that answers that question. So I think, to me, anything involving any business, anything involving cannabis should be coming here for some sort of special permit. So uses involving testing new technologies, I don't know, we can play around with what the word is, but I think, I agree that primarily focused, it should be something much broader, that if it uses cannabis, it's under this definition.
I just think that it doesn't
Yeah.
serve
Yes, it is vague.
anybody
Yep.
if it's too ambiguous.
We could make it very easily by just starting with testing. Well, I'll come up with some language. Yeah, and then that's sort of a modifier, so I'll take the modifiers out. Modifiers create ambiguity, and we don't need those. Okay. Absolutely. That's right, that's right.
In our quest to not be too vague, I still think it should be broad enough that if you're using cannabis really at all, other than, for some either commercial, research, anything other than, personal uses, it's some sort of business, whether it's for profit or not profit, it's falling under this, and it's research and development, it's falling under this.
Okay.
Awesome.
So, anything else on this page? Everybody okay with 11?
111, R and research needs to be capitalized.
Okay, yep, okay, good. Yep. Okay. Then, could you explain 12, and then I wasn't sure how that fit with the prohibited uses as well, if you could tie those two together.
Okay, so 12. So throughout the bylaw, a marijuana establishment encompasses all of the specific marijuana uses. And so what I tried to do with that, that's how it is under the state law. So what I tried to do under that is to say, we're going to continue, we're going to keep the definition of a marijuana establishment to be the broad definition to encompass all of the allowed uses, but to take out the retail and the craft cultivator. So that when we use the term marijuana establishment throughout, there's no sort of, we know what we're talking about. There's no fallback to the state law saying, well, a marijuana establishment under the state law includes the retail and the craft cultivator, and therefore that's what you mean in your bylaw. So I was just trying to be very specific on that.
So I'm even more sure that this is a question you'll want to quickly dispense with, because I think I'm off track here, but does that mean that someone could interpret this as saying, oh no, your bylaw says retail is not a marijuana establishment, therefore we don't even need a permit from you, we're just going to open a retail store because you have said it's not a marijuana establishment?
No.
Okay, good. So that's
Yeah,
not something to be
absolutely not.
concerned about.
No, I think I don't know how redundant I am in this bylaw by saying retail is not allowed. And I'm trying to make it very specific. And then also particularly, and that's provided that the Board of Selectmen have suggested that a general bylaw will be put on the town ballot to prohibit retail and craft cultivation. And so this is in sort of supporting that. So we'll have it.
Our base version in number 12, it emphasizes that point, and 8.14.5 also emphasizes the same point.
Yep.
Okay.
Thanks.
So those are there in case that that bylaw, that general bylaw passes.
Yep.
Put forward and passes, then I think it totally makes sense to then reflect that in the zoning ordinance. have we come, what happens if it doesn't pass? Is that later on, or is that?
So
or
what
do
we discussed at the last meeting was if it doesn't pass, then we could have on the warrant an appendix. So it's an appendix that says if the prohibition on retail and craft cultivation does not pass, then this is the zoning bylaw to be considered. And then you would have that regulation of retail and craft in your bylaw.
So would 12 just be changed to include marijuana, retail, and craft marijuana?
We can get to that.
Okay.
But I think if we could also look at that, because then we can sort of take a look at thinking of what we want to do in sub-district A and B.
Right,
And we can
okay.
parse that out that way. But for right now, I think it might be more helpful just to sort
To
of
go
run through
along with our
this.
base case, because we
Yeah.
could always come back later
Right.
and do the alternative case.
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
So,
Yep.
a question about 12 again.
Okay.
Where it says marijuana cultivator, independent testing laboratory, marijuana product manufacturer, but not retailer or craft marijuana cultivator. Does this also, the way this is drafted, does this capture the research and development?
No, I should put that in there.
Okay, yeah,
Yeah.
I think it should be in there.
Yep.
So I guess I'm just wondering, because I was thinking, geez, should we just say any licensed marijuana-related business? But then if that doesn't capture the R&D, I'm just wondering if it should be everything except, everything marijuana-related except the 2 prohibited uses.
So, right, and I would want to call them out.
Yeah,
List them
exactly.
specifically, so I will do that. I'll list them specifically, the ones that are allowed, and then specifically say, the ones that are not prohibited are not marijuana establishments.
Well, I guess is marijuana establishment used later on?
It is used later on in this bylaw, and I don't know exactly
Yeah,
where.
I'm just trying to see where it's
Yeah.
used.
Can I just make one distinction for you as well? You have AMU just before, which defines all of the things that you're intending to allow. When you talk about marijuana establishment in 12, you're specifically addressing the uses under 94G, Section 20, that you're allowing. And under 94G, Section 20, there are only 5. So you are identifying the 3 you're allowing and the 2 that you're not. So I think you have RMD covered under 11 under AMU, as opposed to 12, which just deals with 94G.
Sure, I'm just wondering if we even need 12.
Yeah.
So I can go, I'll go through the bylaw and look to see if it is
Yeah.
used, but I do recall, since this is so what we did here is we took the MMOD and we sort of overlaid it onto this to create this, and that marijuana establishment term is used throughout the MMOD. So I would have to do a search and find and replace before, I would want to take it out, just to make sure.
Yeah, but maybe the answer then is to refer back to the AMU definition if it is used. I don't know, just an idea.
Okay.
Yeah, okay.
No, I think that makes sense.
Okay. Then, so you talked about 18.14.5A, and then B addresses the issue that you talked about before, is to segment the MMOD by area. Everybody okay with that? I think that makes sense. Then 18.146 is this the language you've ended up, because I know you had a parens, you posted it, the 3 different types, right? Or, yeah.
Missing manufacturing?
So, yeah, that one is one of the ones we were going to point out is missing. Is marijuana product manufacturing, capital M, capital P, capital M, should be in the 4th line down.
Independent testing.
Just a drafting point is you defined AMU in 11, but you've also sort of referenced it. You don't need that parentheses AMU this
Right.
in there, do
I
you?
could just do
Yeah.
AMU. Uh-huh.
Yeah. Or actually, no, maybe you do. I see what you did. Yeah, I see what you did. No, you should keep it. Yeah.
8.14.6 is basically saying that all AMUs are allowed uses.
Yeah.
Okay. So yeah, I think we just need to add, unless we're just going to say AMUs, if we're going to list them all out again, which is okay, I think too, we should add marijuana product manufacturer.
Yep, I will do that.
PM. I think that's good that it should be a new use and not a continuation of the pre-existing use.
Thank you.
I think that's important.
Oh, Jesus, jeepers.
Okay. So anything, okay, so we're through 18.14.6. Now we move on.
Well, what about B and C? Do we want, I mean,
B, where's C?
B is about floor area.
Oh, yeah, okay, now we're into location,
Yeah.
14.7, okay, yeah.
You've got, this is a different red line in the packet.
Okay.
Wait a second, which one am I?
Okay, so would you like me to
Okay,
explain?
could you, yeah, I may have an old one then.
Sorry.
Okay,
So, do you see that with 8.14.6? I can explain this
oh, yeah, I
if you'd
don't have
like.
the current version of. yeah,
Does
you're
that
right, I
help?
walked over it. Yeah.
Okay. So some of the things that have been, and this is language for the board to consider. So some of the things that have been sort of discussed within this whole process of reviewing this is, first of all, the size of the facility and also the connection between the cultivation and the research and development. So the first, so in the MMOD, the medical marijuana, it's limited, the gross floor area is limited to a certain size. And so what this does, the planning board at this point has to determine if you're going to limit it, and in what way will you limit it. So one of the things you could do is you could say at the outset, it's going to be limited to X square feet. You make a determination what it is to sort of test it, and then each year a license has to be renewed. And once that license is renewed, if they want to add to it, they could go for a minor modification of the special permit, which could be approved by the planner to increase that size. So that's one idea, and that's sort of a tiered approach to growth
Right,
of
but
this.
before you had that in the day, I worked off of an old version when I
okay.
made my comments, but the comment about the size, you had that in a different spot before, didn't you?
Yes, I did, and I talked to, yes, and so I brought it sort of more into the front of the bylaw.
Okay.
Just to call it out, because before it was within the conditions of what the planning board could do within a special permit.
Okay.
And now this is sort of its own separate
No, that's fine.
section that
Okay.
it's right out there. In,
What's that?
I have a clean copy of that.
Oh, no, I
Give
just
me
took the, that's fine, I just,
The
yeah.
private version, if you're looking at that, it's an 8.14.13.
Yeah, right, yeah, that's where I was, yeah.
I just don't-
So I guess I just have a procedural question. Is this something we talk about the merits about, or talk about the language about? Where,
What's the advantage of this? I mean, to the tiered approach? I mean, why would you limit someone right off the bat when they already have this many square feet to use for cultivation? Why would you limit them to, like, say, half of that area? I just want to know what's the philosophy.
So I think that the theory behind it is it's a new industry, it's a newly licensed industry, and so that would give the board some assurance that they're in compliance with their license from the state before they could grow any further. And the other reason for it is because right now, in the way a medical marijuana facility is permitted in town is limited in size. And so if you were going to completely get rid of that limitation to the size, then you could potentially have that tiered growth.
So would this mean that they could build out their facility like we were shown in the walkthrough, what they want to do, but not be able to use it? Use portions of it because of this limitation?
I think the concept and the intent was a little bit different.
Right.
First of all, put aside the maximum size of the facility for a second. I think what we're saying is, do we want to go through something where it says the initial tranche of development will license a certain size, and then after a period of time, come back for additional capacity after the concept's approved? That's really what the idea is.
Right, and sometimes they,
Yeah.
I see the kind of political appeal to that. Let's grow carefully. I just think that if we're going to go through a whole special permit process with all of these different criteria, that size is the perfect thing to look at as a special permit, but not to delineate up front, because every case is going to be different. I'd rather just not have any floor size limitations and say, if you come to us and you ask for too many square feet, we're going to say, no, that's too much. It's going to be smaller. If it's appropriate, it's appropriate. But I'd rather deal with it at the back end, frankly.
Because when you come with a proposal, you come with a certain size in mind.
Right.
And
Well, the problem a little bit is that let's say, first of all, I don't actually have at all a problem limiting the overall size of, a site, whereas, like, I think in the MMOD, we capped it. I mean, in fact, it's interesting, because in general in zoning, what you do is you have a minimum size, but you never have a maximum size. And I'm actually okay with not capping the maximum size of it. But for something like this that could have a build-out over a very extensive period of time, I think particularly between the first and the second tranche of development, I think it's important to be able to have a second look into it. It'd be like similar on a subdivision that was, you built the roadway up to a certain point in time and you stopped, and that's what you got approved for the first phase of the project. Then you have to come back to get the second phase of it approved because you never laid out the road before. I think it's a very similar analogy to that. That's the logic of that.
I don't disagree with that. I'm just wondering where you put that. Do you put it at the beginning, so you can only build to a certain size, or do you say, when someone comes in for a special permit, okay, we're giving you a permit for X square feet. If you're going to build, another X square feet, we're not going to consider it a minor modification. You're going to have to come back for a full, modification to your special permit or site plan or something like that. To me, it makes sense to push it to do that, to address that, but more at the end.
Well, I think you actually brought up an interesting approach, because another way of doing it is to do it exactly as you said, is to accept the applications and the merit. The problem is with this specific project, and you can't help get away from it being a specific project, what if the applicant came in with the full 5-year build-out day one?
So I think you evaluate it and say, is that appropriate now? And you say, and if it is, it is. If it's not, then I think we have the power to say, I'm not comfortable with 1 million square feet. I'm comfortable with 500,000 square feet for the first 2 years. Take it, appeal it, or take it and then come back once you've built it out. Let's see how it goes. I mean, I think we have that power.
Based on what criteria?
Based on all the criteria that are coming forward at the end about special permit, are we satisfied that this size is going to relate to noise, it's going to relate to odor, it's going to relate to water use, it's going to relate to electrical? I think the size in itself really doesn't matter. It's the implications of that size, right? What is being 1 million versus 500 versus 250? How does that impact the neighborhood? How does that impact the town? And if we're not convinced that 1 million is appropriate at one time, then you give them a special permit for 250 or 500. But it doesn't seem to make sense to just limit it up front. It does make sense to potentially limit it on the back end based on that's why I think I really like all the special permit criteria at the back about best practices. If all that's followed through, maybe $1 million's okay. Maybe it's not, I don't know, but I don't want to decide that until I actually see the project.
I think once we get to the point, it would, I think, be very difficult to justify any limit because we'd have no criteria to justify it, other than saying, well, you know, we want to see if your best practices work, and I just don't think that's a, I think, again, it's bringing ambiguity in that will make it a very difficult process for all parties, as opposed to recognizing up front that this bylaw is addressing a new industry, which, elements of which could impact the surrounding area. I mean, you mentioned odor, that's one. So what choices would a planning board have if after, say, you know, if there's a project that envisions a size X and the first tranche is 25% of that, still much larger than anything before, and at that point it's not working and the applicant has to come back to expand, there's an opportunity to, I think, really have the ability to require addressing the issue, as opposed to the full X and it's not working. What are the alternatives?
But if it's not working, aren't there other provisions in here to, you know, say like, oh, there's odor, you said there was going to be no odor, and there's provisions in there for fines or whatever, or remediation for odor. I mean, you have all those provisions in there regardless of the size, if it's not working.
I think the provisions in your example, the ability to compel compliance is in fact limited.
Sure, but that, well, I'm not sure it's that limited, but if you're not in compliance with one permit, I'm not going to give you another permit. I'm not going to, right?
Isn't that the point?
Yes. No, so I agree, but it's the end. I guess the question I'd reverse it, that Peter's asked, is how big is too big? How do we know what's too big right now?
Well, I think it's a much difficult question if we have nothing to base it on.
I mean, I'm not hung up on what it is. You know, it intuitively seems to me to be between 200 and 300,000 square feet is a reasonable starting point, you know, at least in my mind. But, I mean, maybe to give a couple of examples, of other examples of where we do something similar is that again, going back to the subdivision example, we hold the lots in a subdivision to ensure that the roadways get built, or else the person has to put a bond in place. Mm-hmm. We actually measure the performance of it and don't release the money until that happens, and that's a case where we have a lot of control. Frankly, in this case, you don't have that much control. The board doesn't have very much control of the situation, and the fact of a measured rollout of the first tranche and then the rest, I think makes for a cleaner, you know, and a safer result for the town. But I mean, in the end, we're probably going to have another detailed discussion on this, and I don't, you know, because I think this is one of the substantive issues. Which approach do we take on this? So we ought to, you know, think about it. Suzanne, you went down the path of, okay, let's build it in tranches, as opposed to the alternative approach of reviewing every application on the merits and then the board deciding whether it's too big, too small. So,
Right, and as opposed to just limiting it outright.
Yeah.
Just because in your MMOD, it's limited to a, you know, in comparison to the project that's being discussed as 1 million square feet, the MMOD is a lot smaller than that. So this sort of provides you some gradation as to what's being permitted.
one thing is, if we do go down that path, I think we may have to, if we did go down that way, the term initial permitting year, you know, modification after 1 year of operation. We may just want to think about that, is how we structure that if we do go down that path.
I mean, is there, just an idea here, because I think we're dealing with big concepts at this point, not the nitty-gritty of this. Is there a way to somehow tier this so that if we're dealing with a really big project that we say, if you are going to do a project of more than 250,000 square feet, then the initial permitting year will, the first year after the permit, there will be several check-ins to make sure that this is going well and that you are complying with odor control and all of that other stuff that we're worried about, the energy, the water, the traffic. And your escrow is going to be held until we see how this goes. And then anytime any project wants to grow by an additional, 10% over what was initially cited, that's going to be a major modification that needs to come back to the planning board. And then maybe that gives us a little bit more control and a little bit more oversight over exactly this type of a big project that has people concerned about what's the impact. Maybe there's a way to approach it, different projects of different sizes.
So one of the things I try to tie it to here is that renewal of a license, the state license.
Yeah.
And so we don't know, but I'm assuming that when there's a renewal of a state license, if there's any violations of that license, which also has odor control, safety concerns, and all the rest of it, that will be flagged. And so that would then be flagged for the planning board, and then you have this request to expand when there's a problem with their state license, and it's sort of tied in. Sort of similar to the ABC, the Alcohol Beverage Commission, when there's a license renewal, then you can look at it that way.
Suzanne,
Go ahead.
this is a small point, but just in subparagraph B, the word exponentially.
Oh, I know, I meant to take that out, I apologize. I do apologize.
Lest we go to 6.25 billion square feet.
I guess I have a question if you want to discussion now on the language. An applicant may seek a modification of the condition after 1 year of operation and after its state license has been renewed to increase the allowed area. Right, without the exponentially. What if the state license was for the maximum area?
It's still going to have to be renewed.
Right, but it's not, but then that after its state license has been renewed to increase the allowed, so it's just after it's been renewed.
Oh, after it's been renewed.
Right. So
I see.
because
Oh, I see.
this
Yeah.
implies that it's being renewed to increase the area.
Absolutely.
And just to be it's renewed.
Right, I'll move that prepositional
Because I
phrase
assume
to
if
the
they're only
appropriate place.
licensed to the state for 250,000 square feet, then our issue is moot.
Right. So it would read instead, an application may seek a modification of this condition to increase the allowed area after 1 year of operation and after the state license has been renewed, period.
Yes.
Yeah.
Do we
Okay.
know if there's any thought, if any of the drafts have caps on size for the state regulations? Are we aware?
You mean from the CCC?
Yes.
No, they do not know. Not yet.
Are any drafts available yet?
No.
So we just don't know. Okay.
Well, we have somebody on the floor there every day, and so I know that the discussion has not come up.
Okay.
So with this,
Jen, could you could you play around with this and maybe, propose some ideas to Suzanne? Because I think, I feel like we could come to a hybrid that we might all be okay with. Yeah, okay, thanks.
so
Great.
this was going to be one of the ones we wanted to discuss at the end, but while you're on it right now, can I
I
take-
don't want to get into a
I
substantive
I don't-
discussion. Yeah.
Could I give you, bullet points of what we're thinking without, I don't want to debate and go back and forth, but
Okay,
just, okay.
but very quickly, yeah.
So you were there, you saw the architectural, the engineering, the renderings, the design, the layout. The concept behind this of being able to control the HVAC, control the temperature, control the lighting, control the odor mitigation, is based on a design to retrofit the entire manufacturing floor of this building. The costs and expenses would include renovating, replacing the roof, pulling out the floors, doing significant demolition, working with tenants to help relocate, reestablish tenanting. So the costs and expenses of doing all of this really dictate the fact that we're looking at building this out functionally, design-wise, layouts, economies of scale, costs to do it. In addition, we're going to start cultivating. And if we start cultivating in this property, the last thing that we're going to be wanting to do is do more demolition, create openings, exposures, vibrations, dust, and things that will actually defeat the purpose of the design that you want us to incorporate, which is state-of-the-art security, state-of-the-art air conditioning and air handling, state-of-the-art odor mitigation. The way the whole production process has been designed to date for the last 6 months has been to lay it out and optimally use the floor of the building and of the property. So I do think there are a few things. Number one, your bylaw is drafted as a daily fine for violation. Number two, your
Okay, we're getting into, I think
I-
your point, they're fair points and
Okay.
legitimate points, and they're actually helpful points, but I just like to do it separately because I just think it would be a
Understood.
cleaner process, so, yeah.
one typo.
Yeah.
Suzanne, in your new alternative B, you call it a medical marijuana establishment, and I think it should be a marijuana establishment.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, you're welcome.
I wanted to go into that item, the thing at the very bottom of page 4 in the alternative, tying the thing to the growth of the research and development. I know we've talked about that, and that was something that we may not know what the percentage was, but it was something that if we're going to do that, Pete, I know that was something that was important to you. I don't know if the way this is laid out is works for you, or?
Well, I'm interested to see it. I don't know that it is the way it would need to be, but, I was hoping we'd had some discussion on that.
Yeah, I don't know, what do people think about that?
This is saying that where the medical marijuana treatment center is, that after initial development, I guess I'm not sure what it's.
So essentially what it is attempting to do is do a linkage between the growth of the cultivation center and the research and development. So it says, after initial development of X square feet of cultivation, thereafter, any increase in cultivation has to be tied to a percentage of increase of development of that research and development. So you could put any figure you want in there. To completely not have any bias in this or any sort of preposition, I'll say, after the initial development of 1 million square feet, any additional increase in cultivation will then have to go, you'll have to have 25,000 to 100,000 additional. You see what I'm saying? There's a proportion of an increase, and that's what this language is.
You could even do it at the very beginning. You could say for X number of square feet of cultivation space, you have to have so much.
You could.
Of the other.
Right, you could start out,
yeah.
right, exactly. You could say, you do for if you're not going to do any limitation on it, you could say for, right, whatever you're proposing, you have to do that additional percentage of research and development.
I think the idea is interesting, sort of like when you're, affordable housing, sort of, if you build a certain amount of units, you need X amount to be affordable. I think I much preferred at the beginning rather than in stages of growth, because then then I think, one, people just play around with the numbers. Okay, we're doing this much now, and then this much later, or we're actually just going to do the whole thing now. The idea of having a certain amount attributed to research and development at the beginning, I think I could get behind that if we had the right amount that we were comfortable with, and frankly, that was committed by the developer, I think that's going to be part of it, but we've heard all along that research and development is a big part of this, so some commitment there in the form of, of the bylaw, I think would be nice, so that if we know that after that this is going to be, so I don't know how we would do it based on
Well, couldn't you do it in a way upfront?
the lot size.
That is also, sort of tracks this current wording. It simply says X percentage of it is R&D, and if it grows, then the percentage of R&D, the percentage follows.
So I know, but I think it would have to be the percentage set aside. Like, you don't know what businesses are going to necessarily be there at any given time. But so, yeah, I think you could say that of your parcel, if you have a special permit for cultivation or manufacturing, whatever we choose, if you have a cultivation permit, 15% of the parcel has to be set aside for research and development. Yeah, I think that,
Place throughout.
and yeah, just, and right, and you just leave it there. And, yeah, I mean, I think it's I like that, I certainly like that approach. I think it's cleaner than what we have here, and I think it's an interesting idea. I'd be curious later on to hear the applicant's take on that.
I can give you your thoughts real quick. I mean, I think reserved is a better word than the developed, because you just don't know who you can get there. I also think, as I had talked about earlier, not just essentially R&D, but it could be any tangential industry related to this. If we could get a lighting company to come and do lighting displays and things like that, it might not be R&D on cannabis or R&D as you're thinking about it, but it's attracting something to the property. Another example might be use of the space for a charitable organization, one that maybe does education and enlightenment. So using spaces that are for good purposes, that are kind of tangential to the industry. I don't think we would want that there. If the town wanted that there, that, would be a different question. But I do think an educational component, a training component for police and fire and safety. So I think so long as it's any tangential entity and so long as it's reserved, because again, until we're up and running and we're throwing off money that we can start to give grants and attract research and development, we're not going to be able to get the research and development there first.
We're kind of getting into the debate
Yeah,
here,
it's
but
debate,
I would
but-
just throw out that one of my observations is, what we've heard so far is really, has been asserting that there will be. So, okay, let's put in a percentage.
Okay, good. Okay, good. No, I thought this was a good discussion on this topic. So let us move along. I think we're now on 18.14.7. I think on this one, just to close off this item is, if anybody has any strong views of language or wordsmithing on what we just discussed, send them to Suzanne, so. Yeah. So let's move on to 8.7.
So I just included the notion of an existing school and a licensed child care facility, which the board had discussed at earlier meetings
Yeah,
on
okay.
Did
8.14.7.
it say somewhere earlier that the planning board is the special permit granting authority?
It's in there someplace.
Yeah, oh, okay, yeah.
It
no,
says
it's in
8.14.8.
Okay, all right,
Yeah.
it's coming up, okay.
Yep.
Yep, thanks.
So, okay, moving on to 8.14.8. I don't think we need to fill in the amounts right yet, but we ought to think about that. I mean, and this is maybe probably a little bit, obviously, more germane for the subsection A part than B, but even in B, yeah, minimum lot size and setback and everything like that.
And so one of the reasons that there's a distinction there between 2 and 3 minimum lot size and area for cultivation, production, and manufacturing, and then also for independent testing laboratory, because from the information that the board has in its sort of packet from it was a Washington State review of the existing marijuana bylaws in various states, it does have a distinction between those two. And also you would sort of logically, you'd think that there'd be more space needed for one versus the other. So that's why there's 2 different ones there.
I guess the one thing that I would say is that if we're dealing with the obviously large project, Osgood project, the question is, does the minimum lot size, it's obviously defined based on the size of the entire parcel, right? I mean, you wouldn't
Right, it's a lot.
expect each and every individual permit that's granted for R&D or so forth to have a separate lot, because it's not a subdivision, it's all in an existing building, and it's, yeah,
Currently,
yeah.
right, yes. Mhm.
I mean, because I suppose there would be the possibility of subdividing the property, but as part of our permit process, we may have that as a condition that you can't further subdivide the property.
Right.
Yeah,
Right. And lot is defined
yeah,
in the bylaw.
yeah.
Yep.
Okay. Yeah, okay. So I think there, everybody just needs to think about what the sizes would be.
Suggestions on something good for comparison?
I mean, I think you look at the
General industrial.
existing, feels to me closer to, you could argue if we had retail, it would be what general business would be, but we're Xing retail out, so it would be like the minimum lot size for, a commercial building, really.
Yeah.
I mean, an office building,
what
I think something like that, B2, B3 would be what I would pick.
So we can also provide if you want, we can give you a list of them for next time also. Lot sizes for the different districts and also maybe in the
Yeah.
different states, what
I
they're
mean, and I
required
think
for.
the
Okay.
setbacks, the same way, I think we'll probably end up, defaulting to something similar to what one of our existing,
Okay.
are.
If we go to, I don't mean to push us along, but on page 6, in subsection D, on page 6, 3D, is I included that language about the best practices for building design that you had asked for last time.
Building.
Okay, thank you.
And then I did have a question. Would there be a distinction between pre-existing structures versus new structures?
Well,
Best practices for building design, if a building already exists? So should it talk about,
Design and refurbishment or something like that, is that?
Yeah.
Yeah, right,
Like
yeah.
Or should it talk about facility?
renovations of the
Yeah.
facility? Yes. I just thought the word building, and
No, I
to your
see.
point, you want some
Yes.
particularity.
Yeah.
I think maybe the renovation or the facility as opposed to the building.
Yeah. Does that make sense, Suzanne?
yes, it does.
Yeah.
So the remaining part of this is the site plan review, special permit criteria from the existing zoning bylaw. What I did, in the way the zoning bylaw is created now is there's a separate a site plan special permit for a project, and then there's a special permit. So I just combined it all so that we wouldn't have to be reviewing two special
Yeah,
permits at the same time.
The one thing that I would say about this is that this is, clearly since you cloned it from our site plan.
Oh, yeah.
It has a slightly different orientation than what I think we want to achieve here, because frankly, in those sorts of things, it's all the external visual impact and so forth that we concentrate almost exclusively on. And here, I do know, like, one of the items is water consumption, okay? But water consumption for something like this is extraordinarily critical, and I'd almost feel like we need a little bit more detail. The same thing, I think, on like the odor and the smell mitigation. I'm not even sure there's anything in the,
I think we need odor in that list.
yeah.
It comes up later, but I don't think it's in this particular.
Yeah, it's not in there, and I feel like it's almost like, we might even want to group the 5 or 6 things that are uniquely critical for a project like this and put them all together.
Okay.
I mean, it might be a little bit different order than the other stuff, but, like one of the things is, for example, is that it's the whole build-out strategy, I mean, and the sequencing and all that sort of stuff is very important, There is something in here on waste removal, but that obviously is, probably more significant than something like this. I don't know, Pete, you probably
Odor-
have a few
odor shows
yourself,
up
yeah.
in 2 other places, on page 13 and also on page 14, but I agree that it should be here in water as well. I mean,
Yeah.
we've discussed that extensively, and
Yeah. I mean, one of the things that, I think this is just a general best practice, and it sort of extends out of this a little bit, but in the same way we have planning board rules and regulations, we ought to maybe have a more detailed version of some of this stuff that we write up, that's our planning board rules and regulations for facilities of this nature. Again, I'm thinking out loud, and I'm not sure I'm 100% there with the idea, but it's almost like there's two ways to do it, is to take those 5 or 6 areas that are really important to us and go into more detail here, or to do it on a separate sort of thing and then maybe cross-reference it, you know. And I don't know how legally you would do that, but.
Right.
Hopeful that the CCC regulations will deal with these things, and we can just say, link to those. But I think it is important to have these placeholders in the beginning, in the section up front about, odor, water, electrical things that we've been kind of talking about. But I think it's going to be hard to define them now about what exactly you want, other than saying best practices and follow the state regulations.
Yeah.
So those may just need to be kind of placeholders until regulations are in effect that we can use.
But organizationally, I'll certainly do that, because I think
Yeah,
that's a very
okay.
good idea.
Yeah.
So I'll just sort of call out and you're right, this is kind of the basic, what you have to include in your plan, if it was a new development, call that out, and then say very specifically to this particular type of use, with the odor, the water consumption, and the rest of it.
Yeah.
I will do that.
And so I think this is another where if anybody has any strong opinions on language here, pass it along to Suzanne. Okay.
Is there anything in the waste disposal and energy and environmental standards sections on the bottom of page 9 that we should really look at more closely?
So I believe that the CCC regulations are going to be looking at those, because and we can certainly track those. If there is any type of, are you looking at sort of best practices that other municipalities require in a operation provision for a marijuana establishment? Is that what you're thinking?
I think it's really a concern that we don't have standards to tie this to for this particular type of waste disposal, and any hazards that may be associated, in part because of the very large volume and the nature of the waste being different than, most waste issues we're dealing with. And that ties in with environmental standards and, energy use as well. So those two sections, we've kind of lifted this out and we're using it, and I think it's a great starting point. But when I look at all this, those are two that stood out. And I'm not sure how to answer your question, because what would be the standards we apply here? I don't think we have them.
No, we don't have them yet.
Right, and so
Right.
we talked earlier on the facility itself of trying to use a best standard approach, and that's better than nothing, but it's, I just think we ought to put some thought to those two areas, waste and energy and environmental standards, because what we lifted this out of, I think, is for sort of general practice, and this is a much more specific issue with, I think, some different attributes that we ought to try to somehow. I don't know how to answer your question because we don't have a standard.
Right, so what I tried to do here is essentially incorporate, when the regulations are promulgated, those regulations, the state regulations for licensing and citing, will be incorporated into the criteria that you review also. So if there's something in addition, I would say it would be a bit difficult for the planning board to come up with some sort of criteria that may be more stringent. I would assume that we're only talking about more stringent. We're not talking about less stringent than the state, so more stringent than any state regulations for waste disposal and energy standards.
I don't know that it's a question of more stringent. I think it's a question maybe of teasing out aspects of this type of waste disposal that are different.
Okay. That's a fair point. Yep.
But do you think of that differently than what ends up being in the regulations that the state's doing, if they're gonna deal with this issue, I guess I still struggle with how we do anything
Right.
different than the state regulations.
So
at this
do
point.
I, but it's a timing, it's a sequence thing, right? If we had those state regulations,
Right, but I like how I personally like how it is now that says it should be that for the waste disposal that it needs to be in compliance with the regulations and no less restrictive than whatever is in the regulations, but it sort of leaves the window open for us to, I mean, I guess we can always come back later and add on more, but.
so maybe my question then is, pursuant to general law, the two sites,
Right.
what are those?
But we don't know yet. They haven't
They
been
haven't-
promulgated.
Those are the ones that.
Those are the ones we're waiting for. That'll come out in December.
Those are the marijuana laws.
Right.
The sites are the statutes, and then what we're waiting for is the regulations that we won't know. But I think this language just says whatever it is that the state comes up with, that's what you've got to do. You've got to do at least that. And it leaves the door open. It says at least that. So I guess as a planning board, when we're reviewing something, it gives us some wiggle room if we want to do something more restrictive. But I don't see how we could possibly come up with something else right
I
now.
really don't think I'm heading to more restrictive. That's not, and I apologize for sort of struggling to describe this. For me, it's not a case of being more restrictive. It's a case of, this is a different type of waste stream.
Right.
I think what you're trying to say is that you want to ensure that that it is different, that we have sufficient due diligence to ensure best practices, that we've scrutinized all the relevant elements of it and don't miss anything.
In that this is different, yes.
Yeah, because I think Jen's right, there's no way we could specify standards to a tenth of a
Can't.
degree. We just
I'm
don't
not
know it, and we'll
suggesting
never be able to
Right.
do that, yeah.
Well, what we will be able to do is, once we have the state regulations, say you have to do at least that. And then, depending on the project, I think, with site plan review and with hearing from them actually what they're going to do, we can tailor it to, okay, are there, is there concerns about the particular traffic patterns that we have, and we want waste removal at certain times of day and stuff like that, which may not be addressed in state regulations because it's dependent on
Yeah.
your actual locality. And those are the types of things I think we can add to a special permit, but I agree, I don't think that's anything we can kind of put together now without the regulations from the state or without the project in front of us.
And one of the things what I could add to this is language to the extent that it says that they have to comply with the regulations, no less restrictive than the regulations, and then do a specific phrase in there that gives the planning board the authority to send it out to a third-party consultant to review it for best practices.
Yeah, I was going to say.
in the industry at the
I
moment.
did want to make a comment
Yeah.
about consultants, that I think that language needs to get beefed up some, because it's a little bit different than the normal civil and stormwater reviews we do, because it's more robust. It may involve multiple consultants. And I don't know, maybe what you do is we enumerate the areas where we want to get support. I mean, yeah.
Could we, on that, I actually think it's a great idea, one for consultants, and then something to maybe tie it to the purpose statement, so, so that,
Yep.
that
To
the
really-
planning board
right.
can, add additional considerations in light of the purpose statement, so that if we have concerns about these, that they have an impact on, neighbors or properties or something like that we can take some limited affirmative steps based on that as well.
Okay,
Might be a little vague, but.
I see what you're saying. Tie it to one of those purposes, so we do have, okay.
That's a good idea.
All right, I'll do that. So I'll do that,
Let me
okay.
make two other points. Here's an example that I think would not apply, because I think it would, I would hope it would be picked up in state regulations, but I'm just going to use it to describe the sort of thing I'm trying to think about. We have waste disposal in this town from the waste plant, right? And it's trucked out and put in a landfill. And that's the result of incineration. And when it's incinerated, it's dry, it goes in a truck and goes out. So one characteristic of this very different type of waste stream is there's likely to be a lot of moisture in the waste material. So we wouldn't want to be faced with trucks that are transporting through town to another site, but leaving a stream of liquid along streets in the town. And I suspect the state regulations will address somehow that the waste disposal cannot allow that type of liquid that has all sorts of components in it to be left along public streets. I think we won't have to worry about that. But it's things like that that are unique to this waste stream without necessarily being more restrictive, but picking up on that I'm worried about. So I like this discussion, it's helpful, and thank you. The second thing I would add is, I mean, haven't we already qualified this? Or is this wording that's
Which
pulled?
one are you referring to?
Promote recycling and, ensure safe and promote recycling and comply with at least the standards of. So those are qualifiers, right? So are there other qualifiers that we should consider putting in there along those lines? And maybe the answer is no. I'm still looking at bottom of page 9, waste disposal, energy and environmental. I don't know if it's on that version.
So, right.
It's on bottom of 9.
I think potentially this is enough. I think we just don't know enough yet to
Yeah, I
add
mean,
more.
Pete, I think maybe for those 3 or 4 areas that are significant, if you could put something together, some of the bullet points of what you want, we can give it to Zan, and, maybe we can put something in. I mean, because, we obviously don't want to have a page for each one of those items, but we might want to have a few more pointers of things, because, I mean, to some degree, this is a document as much for applicants as it is for us about what our expectations are.
As I recall, and again, I
Yeah.
know, there was talk about that it was going to be treated like hazmat, even though it's not hazmat. That was during the tour, so I don't have too many concerns, but I think it's important, like kind of said earlier, that all the things we were told, we make sure that those things are going to happen, because once we have a bylaw, then they have to happen. Right? But how to write those in, I don't know that we necessarily have to write that it's going to be treated in the same way as hazardous material is treated. Maybe it does become that. I'm not sure, but I think that's what we think about.
Okay. So, Suzanne, you're okay on, just beefing up the consultant section? Yeah, okay.
And then on page 11, where there was some discussion about the buildings built to the specific designs, I will change that to the facility. And that's in page 11, 3J. So I don't know if you're ready to skip to page 12, 8, 14, 10, and 11, and 12. Oh,
Just one small
Okay.
comment is that I think on the findings of fact, the design requirements, we ought to probably just all go back one more time and make sure everything we just talked about related to odor and blah, 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 blah is in there, so.
Okay. Okay.
Suzanne, in 1411, and one other place in an earlier draft where you mentioned Campus Control Commission, you changed it to Commonwealth of Massachusetts. I think that was to account for the possibility that the approval could come from the Department of Public Health. So can we make that same change here as well?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so I'm sorry, Suzanne, we're,
Okay, so 8, 14, 10, and this is on page 12.
12, yeah.
I'm going to scroll down here. So it's 8, 14, 10, 11, and 12. Those are sections that I've just taken from the zoning bylaw. Those are general,
Yeah.
special permit sections from the zoning bylaw. And then when you get into 8, 14, 13, And those are
I'm sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
8.14.12, in terms of the bonding, this is a little bit trickier because it's a completely different circumstance, because it's not like a normal bond where you're basically holding the bond out for the completion of roadways and sewers and things like that. It's more, this is something I think we have to think about is, do we want to bond if there's a disaster or something here, or how do we handle that as a,
like we had talked about, we don't want to get left holding the bag if something happened. I mean, that was our discussion about financing, if the project goes halfway and then what happened. So I think that is a worthy consideration. Are there any insurance requirements or anything like that we could put in as well? I mean, I'm just thinking about that. I don't know what the insurance situation is going to be like for marijuana-related businesses, or if that's a zoning, really part of a special permit zoning thing, but just
In terms of land use, whether or not so typically what you do is you do a security bond for performance or something like that. You could require that as a part of the application to show that there is some sort of insurance, but you wouldn't have, you wouldn't typically.
Host agreement too.
Right, and you
Okay.
wouldn't typically have the town as an
It'd be part of the host
additional,
agreement.
right. So we could add, for the purposes of 12, where you're talking about bonding, we could make it specific to the odor control and waste management, if those are the kind of concerns that you're going to have here, like sort of the
or- and
infrastructure.
the remediation of the facility in the case that there's a significant problem that can't be remedied. Yeah.
Okay, that's, yep. Okay. So 8.14.13, that just sort of is broad language that allows the special permit granting authority to impose conditions on a special permit.
I worry that the phrase "shall a facility be open to the public" is pretty broad. I know that the marijuana distribution, the medical is not to be, distributed to the public, but what if it's I don't know. I guess I'm just someone coming in to participate in research or something like that. I'm just wondering if we can think about refining that. And just. I
So
don't know.
maybe it's restricted to uses allowed in the premises or something like that only.
Right.
Yeah.
Right,
Yeah.
yeah.
Okay,
I'm not sure there's a need to limit hours of operation, but
Yeah.
at least by this, I mean, maybe a specific project. I don't know if there's a way that it says we can be limited.
Yeah, if we just say the hours of operation may be limited.
Right.
And then
Because there may be ones that,
open.
there may be ones that it is appropriate. There may be ones that doesn't matter if it's running all night.
There's like some day or whatever,
Right.
and it's a medical marijuana dispense, then we'd want to limit the hours, but others we might not.
right, and I'll take a look at the zoning bylaw with regard to other commercial uses and to see what kind of limits there are, because I know that in some instances before the planning board just a couple of weeks ago, there was some dispute about the commercial operation having, ongoing all evening, and then the abutters complaining about that, so you may want the ability to limit it.
In this case, the operation in a facility of this type would be around the clock. So it's really things like maybe coming and going of trucks or shipments,
Yeah.
or, waste or supplies that might be, is the pieces external to the facility.
Yeah.
And then 8.14.17 is, oops,
One
sorry.
other thing,
Okay.
just a very small thing, is item number 8. there's a reference to incident report. Is that a defined?
I'm sorry, where are you? I'm sorry.
8.14.13, item, sub-item number 8.
It's number 9 in the red line.
Oh, is it 9 in the red line? Yeah, 9 in the red line, yeah. It's a reference to incident report, and it's capitalized, so I didn't know if it's a defined term someplace or,
Do we have a zoning enforcement officer?
what's that?
The zoning enforcement officer, do we have?
Do we have one? Yes, we do. And so this is language right out of the MMOD.
Okay, so it's
Yep.
already defined someplace else. It just, because
An
incident
incident
reports
report?
say capitalized, so I figured it's got to be defined someplace. I never saw the definition, that's all.
That, actually, I don't know. I'm assuming that's, we could make that.
It's not a big deal.
Yeah, we
Yeah.
could make that in small
That's.
font as
yeah,
opposed to
that's
doing an
fine.
incident report.
Or, what I have is number 6, no smoking, burning, or consumption of any product containing marijuana or marijuana-related products shall be permitted on the premises of an AMU. I would just say unless authorized by state permit. So if a research and development, or if I assume an independent testing laboratory probably would have to do something. I don't know what it is, but I don't know.
We had the exact same comment, with the exception of an allowed marijuana research and development use, because I don't even know if it would be a state permit, it may not be. For instance, let's say we want to let the police do a driving impairment testing.
You could just eat brownies.
Exactly,
Right.
and then drive the cars.
Right. It's consumption, right, consumption.
Oh, that's a good point, yep.
So maybe we just need to think about that one, because maybe there could be reasons why you would allow consumption under limited, very, very limited circumstances.
You might do burning to test with mice.
Okay, so,
Right.
so I'll come up with some language that limits it to the sort of the core of the business. You can consume it if it's part of the core of the
Yeah, I
business.
mean, obviously, we're not talking about,
Right,
pot shops or bakeries, but
okay.
it's part of research and development, and I could see that as an actual potential legitimate use.
The annual reporting, love it that you put in there. The question becomes, what should be in the annual report other than the licenses? Because we ought to maybe somehow say as specified by the plan or something, because otherwise, we may think there's going to be all these metrics and there's not. And, we ought to, they probably ought to provide a little bit more clarity what's in the annual reporting. But I do think,
Okay.
like, one of the things that we did a while back that's worked out extremely well is, the reporting that we do with the GLSD. And so, maybe that's a model that's a little bit more prescriptive, but the basic idea is pretty good.
I can look at that.
Yeah. Okay. Moving right along.
So in this version, I included a specific violation provision, which you had asked for last time. That was of the $300 a day, and just sort of the notice that the town can file action in court.
Yes, excellent. We put a provision in every single one of our special permits about the period of time that it's active for, if no work gets done. And I'm trying to remember, that's in the bylaw, isn't it? Is it a part of the general special permit bylaw? I don't think we
When
need to repeat
a
it here.
permit expires, if it's not exercised, is that what you're
Yeah.
referring to?
Yeah, within a
Yes.
period of time, yeah.
Yes, it's in the bylaws, also in the state law.
Okay, so it's already in there.
Yep.
Okay.
8.14.2, I think there should just be a comma after correct.
Can you say that again?
So the name of the town, North Andover, to prevent, comma, correct, or should be comma, restrain, comma, or abate. I like the Oxford comma.
Okay.
But, sorry.
Okay, so,
I think that,
does this mean we're through our march?
there we go.
Wow. so any just sort of summary thoughts, having went through it?
I've been waiting on that one for months, to be blunt.
You like to be in the weeds.
Sorry. No,
Jen?
that was very helpful. That was good.
Yeah. Jen, any?
No, I agree. I think this is a great process.
Yeah.
I think we made a lot of progress.
Good, good. Aaron? Yeah. Pete?
Helpful.
Good, good, excellent. Thank you,
Okay.
Suzanne.
Yep.
Good job. Yeah,
So could I actually ask you a question?
Sure.
So we had the warrant articles, potential warrant articles. What actually happens with those? Do they come to the planning board for opinion, or do they just go to the
Oh,
town
for the
meeting?
general bylaw, is that what you're referring to?
So no, petition initiative, some individuals.
Oh, I'm
send
sorry,
some
now
in.
I know what you're talking about, yes.
Um,
The citizens petition
Yes.
that's requests, so that's twofold. I believe that's a general bylaw to
And a
prevent
zoning.
all marijuana uses, and then there's also a zoning bylaw.
Right.
In that, and so because that, and it's also conditional, right, as to when it would be put on a warrant. But because it's a zoning bylaw, it would go through the same process that it would go before the planning board.
Okay.
For that process, yeah.
Mr. Chairman, can I ask for a clarification? What do you mean it's
okay. Come right up and identify yourself for the
On
record.
40 Academy Road, I presented the petitions to the Board of Selectmen. There was a bit of a misstatement in the newspaper that I would like to clear up. It said in the newspaper that we were trying to prevent all marijuana use in town. Clearly, these days you can smoke them if you've got them. That's the new law. There'll be no difference in usage in North Andover from any other town or city in the Commonwealth. All our article and bylaw and zoning article aim to do is to eliminate all commercial marijuana uses, so the 5 categories that Suzanne has talked about before. No smoking in your own home and that sort of thing. But Suzanne, I'm sorry, I don't know your last name, or I'd call you something else. Nice to meet
You
you.
can call her town council, how's that?
Town council just said that there was a condition on when they go on to the warrant, and I believe they go on to the very next time a warrant opens up, those articles will be on it.
I did mean that, yes.
Okay. Okay.
Okay.
And if anybody has any other questions, I'm happy to answer them. I do believe that you guys will have to hold hearings on the zoning bylaw.
Okay, well, we obviously are working on this. We take in consideration what you're proposing, we take in consideration what the selectmen are proposing, and we try to do our best with all that.
I have a tremendous amount of respect for the deep dive that you guys have taken into marijuana. This is an incredible amount of work, and it's clear that it's very tedious, and you're all doing a great job trying to protect the town as best you can. We merely want to put the other solution in front of the people in town because North Andover voted no on the ballot initiative in 2016. We have every right to keep all commercial marijuana interests out of town. That idea has not been fully discussed by the people of North Andover because of well-funded corporate interests, and we just like to have it on the table as well. So thank you very much.
Okay, folks, I think you were going to make a comment, so go ahead.
Thank you. My name is Hooks Johnston. I'm on the advisory board of the Massachusetts Inventory Works. I just want to kind of come up high, John, if I can. And I remember 2 comments that were made by yourself and Peter that I kind of want to go back to a little bit. Peter, you, at one of the meetings, you said to us, can you assure us that this is going to be successful? That we're not going to move out the tenants and then we just have an empty building? And we said, well, that's a good question. And we have tried to present over the last few months what our business plan is and what our ideas of how to go forward, both on the wholesale side and on the medical R&D side. The other comment that rings in my head is one you made, John, that said you can't remember in your tenure here of 30 years, and I tried to remember my tenure of 25 years in your same seat, where we've actually controlled what happens inside the building other than its basic use. If I may, respectfully, I think your example of a development is a little different, because this is an existing building, and we're talking about how we're going to use the inside of it. And what we try to present to you, when it's fully used, these are the implications of water usage and traffic and power and everything else that you all saw. So I would suggest to you, you should keep those in mind when you look at this, because I think the size of the operation, if we describe it at full bore, which we've tried to do, should be driven by the market. Because the market will ensure that this facility grows profitably, so we can divert money to the Innovation Center, which is one of our main goals. It means that someone else won't fill that market, and when we finally have that capacity a year or two from now, under this potential deal, that it's already full, and there won't be a need for it. The other thing to keep in mind is that the host agreement that is being negotiated now is based on square footage of cultivation. And if that's limited, then the benefit that the town will get will be diminished. Okay? The other point, though, which is a valid point, Peter, is this has to be done in a controlled way. But you have 8 pages of conditions that you've put in here, and we agree with them all. We've actually amplified a few, and I think you're considering amplifying a few others. Plus, we have an annual review by the state. You have a zoning enforcement officer who looks at it daily, who must address complaints, and you even have the complaint reporting in here as well. So, Chris, I think you hit the nail on the head. I think you've got a lot of control, and we can't operate from one day to the next unless we obey those conditions. The other problem, which I hope you'll understand, is that if we expand the building in segments, the quotes that we have gotten to date would mean the cost would be roughly 40% higher than building it out in one time, which I think is reasonable if you think about it, because that's our plan. That's our plan to do that, assuming we get approval to go forward. That will inhibit our ability to support the Innovation Center. It will inhibit our ability to do seed money for them, and inhibit a lot of things. And it goes back to your point, Peter, of ensuring that we are successful, because we do want to be successful. We will benefit, no doubt, and the town will benefit, and I honestly feel the medical community will benefit. You all know I have a certain affinity to autoimmune diseases, and that's why I'm here, to make sure we do that, and we will. Thanks.
So, go ahead. I don't want to get into a debate, but I appreciate your points. I see we have 7 pages of conditions. We just, yeah, okay, I thought you said 7, but we went through them. Yeah, and all fair points. But when you say that, therefore, we have ample or full control, I just pose a question to you. What do you estimate your daily revenue will be from the full operating facility? And what percentage of that would a $300 a day fine represent? I mean, really, it's a small cost of business, right, Hooks?
But you can shut us down. You can take us to court, I heard.
I'm just
And you can, and a stop order.
just offering another perspective.
Okay.
Okay? That we have 8 pages, and if an entity doesn't follow it, they're subject to a $300 a day fine. And for a lot of people, that's a lot of money. But again, the
not.
question to
It's
you
not.
is, what would your operating revenue be per day when you're at full capacity? And
I don't know that number, but
you
it's
ta-
significant.
but you
It's
take-
significant.
You take the point.
Clear, yeah, but I also,
So
Peter.
I'm just offering another
Thank you.
perspective.
Can I give a counterpoint?
course.
The counterpoint is you have legal recourse, as I understand,
Right.
besides the fine or the stop order. Just like the FDA can shut down a plant in a minute, I think you've got the same capability to do that.
I don't think we're the FDA, but I appreciate the example.
I'm very glad, by the way, I'm very glad you're not. I dealt
Somehow,
25 years with them. I don't want to do
We
that.
got to keep the video of this. if this thing rolls forward in 6 months, you're arguing with us about this point, I'm going to bring this up again, and you're going to tell us we have this great control, because I know you're going to tell us a different story, then you're going to say you have to do it.
John,
And that's,
John.
and you know, being on the planning board for a long time,
Oh, yeah.
that's the way the world works.
And we've stopped
Yeah.
some people dead in their tracks, and I'm sure you have too. Too. So, thanks.
Right. Okay. Suzanne, just in terms of, what do you think the next step is? Is just spinning an updated draft?
Yes.
And, and if everybody can contribute in some of the areas we talked about.
That would be
that'd good.
helpful.
Yeah.
So, right, so I will incorporate these comments and provide another draft, and then there's some things that we left out because they're substantive that still have to be
Yeah, we'll
grappled
come
with.
back. We'll
But
come
once
back
we
to
get
that. I
that,
think if we have the framework.
okay,
With all the parentheticals out.
Okay.
And it just flows, I think we could start knocking the items off and come to
Okay.
consensus on them, so.
okay.
I do think at our next meeting, it might be worthwhile to just start talking about some of the timing of, because we're gonna be in December, assuming that this goes for the, as it appears for a regular town meeting. We're not in a time crunch, but we're also, starting some public hearings
No,
in
you're right,
relative
and
short
there's-
order.
I think even separate from the formal public hearing, there's public outreach
Just
that,
The
will-
process needs to,
that we will solicit for this, that you wouldn't normally do in a zoning change.
Yep.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, no, that's a good idea. We ought to work backwards and see how much of a cushion we have, so to allow for all the individual steps we want to take, so, yeah. Good.
In addition, I guess I'd just also like to ask Suzanne if you have any clarification on what the Board of Selectmen is thinking. I know that there was some consideration of potentially a special town meeting. Is there any update on timing on that or what's happening?
I don't have any.
Okay.
We do have one of the members of the Board of Selectmen here, but Rosemary, I don't want to put you on the spot if there's nothing new to add. No.
I think what town council said.
Could you come up too, Sue? Yeah.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for all working so hard on this project. So we haven't really come to, as town council said, we really haven't come to a clear decision. I think there's a lot of discussion of what the Cannabis Control Commission might be putting out there. There's talk among different members about things such of that nature. And not having something just before we're having our real town meeting. And then we sort of have to pace it. So you don't want to have a town meeting and then have another one a month later, so a lot of it's got to do with, as you said, public input, that you will be having your hearings, and I think I've said, this is no surprise to anyone, that this should not be rushed. It's a big step for the town, people have said that the town originally voted against this in 2016. That's why we have a right to consider that now. And the decision of the planning board also was not one that I would suggest would push this forward, but you are taking up again, even though it's 2 years. I know there's special conditions, but a lot of people in town don't even know that this is going on. They don't get the paper, they don't watch the meetings, and I'm running into that all the time. So I don't think it should be rushed. We really owe our citizens the right to weigh in and be a part of it. It's a big decision.
Yeah.
Anything else?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, that's great.
All right, so I will get you something for your next meeting.
Good, excellent.
All right.
Somebody like to make a motion to approve the minutes for our last,
I don't think there were.
whether it says November 7th.
At least there were not any
Oh, there were.
online. Yeah,
Oh,
it's
okay.
listed, but I think they've not been prepared. I think they're
Oh,
going to be
okay,
ready next
so,
time around.
okay, that's fine. So, yes, I know, okay. Is there anything else anybody wants to bring up before we break? If none, does somebody want to make a motion to adjourn?
I'll make that motion. I'll make a motion to adjourn.
Second.
Motion made and second, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye, okay, great, thank you.